Thank you so much for joining us, Dan Weijers from Waikato University in New Zealand. This is very exciting to have you on today to have a little chat about researchers and open access. Dan is also the co-founder and editor of the International Journal of Wellbeing, which is a fully open access journal. It's listed on DOAJ and it is a fantastic example of open access. So I guess to start with, Dan, I'd like to ask you about the benefits you've experienced with open access as a researcher, as someone publishing.
So I'd love to say I've had amazing success publishing open access, and I know that open access has made the difference, but it's something that's impossible for an individual to know, really. Some of my open access papers are not read or cited a lot, and some are. And so for an individual, it's hard to know because it's the quality of the research, the prestige of the place where it's published and so on. But I do try and publish open access. And so I've even retrospectively made articles open access. So an article with Springer proved to be quite popular, even though it wasn't open access. And I found some funding to pay the fee, which is quite expensive, thousands of dollars to make it open access retrospectively, just to, if something seems to be valuable, to try and make it more widely available. So personally, for my research, I think it's helped, and that's just based on the studies that compare open access publications with non-open publications in the same kinds of, to try and control for where it's published and so on. And so that's, there's a 60% benefit or something, or sometimes even like a fourfold benefit for readership, perhaps. Citations, maybe 60% benefit. But it's always, it's hard to know exactly how it would affect any individual person's research.
Definitely. Do you think it's had any impact on your contacts, perhaps in the research kind of world? Have you?
Well, through the journal. So
yeah.
I set up the International Journal of Wellbeing with Aaron Jardin, and then various other co-editors have helped along the way. And when we were setting it up and gathering like an editorial board, so setting up a journal is, lots of people set up a journal and then it dies 2 days later or a year later because no one submits to it, because no one knows it exists, or it has no prestige. And so it's not valuable for researchers to attempt to publish in. And so we tried to generate prestige for the journal by getting really famous, like our favorite researchers. So I'm fairly junior now still as an academic, but this is back when I was a PhD student and Aaron was a lecturer. But we asked our favorite researchers to be involved, and a lot of them agreed because it was open access. And not just gold open access, platinum open access. It's just no author fees, like no readers have to pay for it. And then so all of a sudden I started getting like invitations to things, like a meeting at the United Nations in New York on happiness and well-being. And that's because of the contacts that I made through setting up the journal. So the contacts I wouldn't have made if I wasn't interested in setting up an open access journal. And that's what it was from the start. We didn't want to, try and create a journal and then sell it to publishers or something, a publishing house, because we have been offered. People have tried to say, hey, let's make a deal for that. But so now the journal's actually locked up in a charitable trust, so we can't sell it for profit now.
That's clever.
Remove the temptation.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because I did read that in the article that you sent me, that you had been that offered multiple times, and I think that's really valuable. And I love the way that your career, like you're saying, you started as a PhD student, your career has progressed at the same time as the journal. So it's almost impossible probably to say you could separate the two, like they're intertwined completely, which is amazing. And to be, invited to the UN and things like that, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Fun,
I
like
never
extra question.
expected. Sorry, I never expected any of those things to come from it. I didn't really think about that at all. But it's definitely for me by far the greatest benefit is all these connections and invitations to things that really have helped my career. Yeah.
That's amazing. Bonus question. How did you get up the courage? This is not open access. This is just courage question, I guess, to ask your favorite researchers. How did you approach them to join your journal?
It was a really exciting time. So I crafted individualized emails to people, and without any typos at all.
Yep.
And then I would wait, and I'd be excited to check my emails to see what they said. And I was really surprised that most people agreed. So it took quite a long time to have enough information in the email, but not too much, and everything. So yeah, a bit of preparation. Also, I made a business plan for the journal.
Yep.
I also have a business degree, and so yeah, I wanted to demonstrate this was a good idea, that this journal was needed, because lots of academics also think there are too many journals. And so I tried to cover all the bases. So it was a big project, took a lot of time, but yeah, I was amazed that like hardly anyone said no.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that need then, and that want for people to be involved in open access. It's just about finding them sometimes, I guess.
Yeah, and so little things as well, like at the last minute we said, hey, let's call it the International Journal of Wellbeing. And actually that was Aaron's idea, and I really think that made a big difference as well.
Yeah.
Just in terms of prestige, when starting a journal from nothing, it is kind of the case that you have to get that prestige from somewhere. And as bad as it sounds, like choosing the right name might make a difference. But we do have an international editorial board, and we do have authors are from all over the world, and reviewers are from all over the world. So it is a fully international journal. But that kind of became true.
Yep. Yeah. Well, you aimed for that. That's the progression you went for. So that's fantastic. What challenges did you originally face making your work open access? You did say you've done some retrospective open access. So kind of how did you go about those types of challenges?
So as an emerging researcher, we have to publish things, and we have to publish in reputable places if we want to get a job or get promoted. And so there's this kind of competing. So even as myself as a researcher, I'm really interested in open access research, and I think I have a moral obligation to try and promote it and publish. I also have this prudential reason to not publish open access, because a lot of the most prestigious outlets aren't open access, or they may be offered gold open access, which I think is better than nothing, but I think it's perpetuating a flawed system, and lots of governments and universities and researchers, including me somewhat, are buying into it, and it's kind of keeping us away from a dream setup where we have platinum open access journals. So it's that tension between wanting to seem like a prestigious researcher, a really good researcher, and getting it out there, getting more people to read it. So publishing gold open access in a prestigious journal is kind of like doing both of those things, but not quite as much as perhaps either just. So it also depends on the discipline.
And then in terms of advocating, and I guess this can come from either sort of hats that you wear, what challenges have you faced in advocating for open access, and in particular where you are in New Zealand?
So several years ago, wellbeing and public policy is becoming a really big thing. So I was co-organising a big conference in Wellington that brought together government, policymakers, lots of NGO workers and researchers. And at the end of that, I kind of gave a little open access spiel, like, looking around the room, there are so many people here who don't have access to those journals. They don't have access to the research, but they're working in that area. And that's why they're here. And so it's really a tragedy that, brilliant researchers are making brilliant research that could be really useful, and the people who would want to use it can't have access to it. So at the national level, sure, they have access to those journals, the policymakers, but so many policymakers act at the local level, or they're just further away from the centre and they have less money, and so they can't afford to have subscriptions to journals. And even the individual price of getting one article here or there, that would soon add up for them in a way that makes it very hard for them to do their job as well as they could. And in the case of wellbeing and public policy, maybe make the world a better place or something like that. So they're restricted in that because of their lack of access to the research, and they have to go through kind of secondary channels, or they're looking at news reports or little blogs or just abstracts. And if people are doing serious work, that's not enough. And so I was there saying this, so like, come on, all the researchers here, let's publish open access. Look at all the people and so some of the people in the audience cheered. It was the only cheer at the whole, conference. That's because amazing. They were like, yes, that's what we need. But I kind of looked across at this famous economist who was there, and he just did the face like, well, we can't. So in economics, there's a list, it's called like a tenure list, and it has a list of journals on it, and not many of those are open access, but they're the journals they have to publish in to get recognised for promotion and so on. And part of that is to combat all the predatory journals. So anyone can publish anything, like a book, an article. These days, it doesn't matter. I mean, I get invited to publish in articles, like journals that are about things I know nothing about at all. Like I don't see how anyone would think that I was in that discipline or that area. And so because of that, there's a point to these lists. It's universities that want to set themselves up as prestigious research universities, so they want their academics to only publish in the most prestigious journals. And sometimes open access is seen as being less prestigious. And
in Australia, our government-funded research must be published open access. It must be made available through open repositories and institutional repositories and things like that. So there's all these boxes that researchers, have to tick. But there's this gap in New Zealand funded policy.
It's a tricky area. So imagine that the government says every researcher at a New Zealand institution, they have to make their research fully publicly available. But the publishers that the researchers want to publish with for the prestige factor, and even to be recognised by New Zealand's performance-based research funding system, so the government will actually recognise these non-open access journals, just in line with disciplinary norms. So the government's kind of unwittingly hurting itself at the same time. So anyway, the government says all this access has to be freely available. So the publishers say, well, now that we know it has to be freely available and that you're coming to us, there's not a huge amount of competition, perhaps, in certain disciplines. So the fee's now $10,000 to make this article open access. But because those journals are bundled and they service more than New Zealand as a country, some articles will not be open access. And so the libraries will still have to pay for the bundles. And so actually what happens is the government would just end up paying even more money through the universities, through the author fees, to produce the research. Yes, it would be more open, so more people would be able to read it, but it would cost the government more money to do that. But there's a different way. There's a different way that we could do this, that the government says to universities, hey, we'll give you half of the money that we're giving you to buy the library subscriptions and pay the author fees, and use that to publish things yourself, like Oxford University Press. Each university has its own publishing arm that handles journals as well as books. And the prestige factor for universities is if we have the most prestigious journals that we're publishing, that's kind of reflects well on us. And publishing doesn't mean editing, so you don't need to have all the editors coming from one particular university, any kind of bias that might come from that. That's just that it's published and marketed and so on from and distributed or hosted, because it's just all freely open access. And there are like EBSCO, and there are kind of indexes that would also, they approached us as well, like, hey, we want to like index you and everything. Like, well, we have Google, and we have these ways that most researchers use to access things. Actually, they don't use those indexes very, very much anymore. They know what they're looking for. They want all research when they're searching to look at it once. And so lots of these academic businesses just don't need to be there, just cut them all out. At the same time, then there's no prestige differential that might hang around. And so, I'm sure there's lots of people dotted around in every university that can see that this would totally work, and they'd be happy to do that. And there's lots of people good people in universities who understand like publishing isn't that hard. So we do it with just a few people who are researching this or that, and we managed to do it. It could be done better, but there's lots of tools already available, like open journal software. And so we pay $1,000 a year for DOI, $1,000 a year for hosting and support for open journal systems.
Yep.
That's it. You could also pay someone to do copy editing and proofreading. We used to doing it in-house. Like the editors are doing it at the moment, which is not ideal, but it's kind of based on how much funding we get.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So it's probably a good segue into how can open access practitioners or libraries in general help you get through these challenges? So, if you're saying opening publishing arms at each institution and things like that, how do you see, like, where can we fill the gaps? What gaps are missing that the libraries could potentially fill for you?
So I think libraries could be publishers. Now, maybe if a university already has a university press, then they could do it. But librarians actually know quite a lot of the things that would be useful for them to help with the publishing process. And so, as well as knowing about the lists of what are the good open access journals and what are the predatory ones. So that's kind of a basic thing. But then when an academic comes along and says, hey, we need a publisher for this journal, we want to do it in-house, do you want to help? And just a couple of librarians saying, yep, we think that's a good idea, we could help, and drawing a few people in, because lots of academics spend a lot of time volunteering for journals and editorial roles and reviewing roles and so on. And we probably don't really want to do all the other bits of the publishing process as well if we can help it. So if someone else can step in and manage that, or like bring the right people together, and librarians often have those skills, and they also have the networks within the university of knowing like a range of people. So I mean, that could work. Would be more helpful if it's lined up with what the government does as well at the same time. And maybe that's something someone whose job it is just to promote open access can make the manifesto. And
I was curious to know how the open access practitioners and librarians should be talking about open access outside the academic community.
So I think the most important group are there's practitioners of whatever. So kind of going back to the wellbeing and public policy example, people who are just trying to do their jobs, maybe it's NGOs or local government, and they just don't have access to this information. And the more they can talk to their central or the higher level place and say, can we have access to this? Can we have access to that? But they'd be better off just kind of complaining more directly to the government, saying, hey, why haven't you made all research openly available? And so for people and for open access practitioners to give those groups the little package they need to make it very easy to send that information to the government or to the central part and say, hey, I've noticed the publishing system's a bit broken, really. Like, couldn't we do it another way? That would make us way more effective in our jobs, and overall the system way more efficient.
If you could give a researcher, one piece of advice about open access, what would it be?
Maybe it would be to think, so there's a prestige issue, but there's also increasingly, especially in the UK, there's kind of an impact goal now that researchers need to demonstrate that they are affecting real people in the real world somehow. And open access publications are more likely to be picked up by like social media, kind of news outlets and so on. And so will be easier, will have a bigger impact probably, unless it's a terrible open access place. And so, because thinking about career progression, don't forget about impact. So if your country maybe doesn't measure impact yet, it probably will start to measure impact. And so publishing open access also helps with impact. And if it's open access and you do those kinds of things, then you are opening the door to the public around the world to see your research. So you can get really big impact that way. But if your research isn't open access, it won't follow through to the actual primary research.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate all the time you spent with us today, and the great work that you're doing in the open access space. Thanks for watching this video. Visit our website for all things open access.